If you frequent Dungeons & Dragons Reddit, which I highly don't recommend, it's a horrible place over there, you might have come across something called D&D horror stories, or RPG horror stories. And a lot of these stories that pop up when I read them or when I watch them from Crispy Tavern or something like that, a lot of them can be avoided, like, off the bat. So today, I'm going to go through 5 DM red flags that you can recognize almost immediately, which will prevent you from playing in a very bad game. Because remember, no D&D is better than bad D&D.
Riser, double.
I take how much damage? The first red flag, and one of the most common ones, is going to be overly restrictive on making people play their gender. Now, there are some reasons that people, or DMs especially, might want people to play their own gender. It mostly comes from, well, honestly, stupid horny nerds. Sometimes, guys in particular, think it's really, really fucking funny to play a female character, but then go out of their way to be the horniest, most frustrating, annoying person on the planet. And it's never been funny, and it ruins a lot of games and ruins a lot of people's experiences. But more specifically, what I've seen people do is force, like, women to play women. And that is normally done from a very similar place to the man that wants to play the woman just to be horny, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with playing a gender that isn't yours. Gender swapping, it's not called cross-playing. Cross-playing is the term for it. It's when you play a gender, a character who has a gender that's not yours. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but there are some warning signs when someone is going to be going off the rails, and for dungeon masters, when they are overly restrictive, again, particularly on women, but when they are overly restrictive of you playing your own gender, there is a very good chance that it is because they want something to happen that is not going to be fun for anybody involved except disgusting perverts. So the next time you go to create a character, especially if you are a woman and the DM is very adamant you only play a woman, I would walk away from that table before things get too bad. Next up is the over-involved DMPC. This is something that you need to be very wary of. I currently, in the campaign that I am running, have a DMPC that the players are escorting. Now, the difference between an NPC and a DMPC is that the DMPC has some sort of role in combat. But the role that the character I put into the game has in combat is basically just to protect itself. It's a 13-year-old wizard that they are escorting to a certain city, and the whole point of the character is to be something to protect, something to escort. So, in combat, the only thing it does is protect itself. If the DM is putting in lower level NPCs to assist you in combat, lower level mercenaries, or perhaps a villager that has like 1 level in warrior or something like that, then that's normally not an issue. What becomes an issue is when the DM insists that the DMPC following you around is 12 levels higher than you and is absolutely one of the most badass broken anime protagonist type things in the world. This often comes from DMs with main character syndrome who are very, very upset that they're never going to be able to actually write a fucking book because they don't have the discipline necessary to do it. And so they're going to intrude on your fun by consistently putting in some of the worst fucking things imaginable, including overpowered monsters that only their DMPC can fight. Again, DMPCs, much like the gender locking type of thing, are not an inherent red flag, but it is more of how the dungeon master does it. If they are providing you with something that maybe assists a little bit in combat, has very minimal like involvement in combat, or if it's something like an escort mission or something like that, those are normally fine and normally ran very well. But if it is something that is an actual powerhouse of a fighter, then it's a bad fucking sign, and as soon as you see that, you should probably excuse yourself from the game because you're not gonna have a good time. Next up is favoritism. Favoritism is probably the biggest red flag on this list outside of the last one. Favoritism is something that you can recognize very early on. If you build a character, and a very good test is to ask for something like a magic item that's like very rare. If you go in the DMG, if you look up magic items, you find one that's like very rare, ask for it from your DM. If they deny it, that's fine. You kind of want them to deny it because like a level 1 character, level 3 character shouldn't be having those kinds of items. But if they deny it and then they give another player something similar, that's a problem. If you ever notice your DM going rules for thee, but not for jackass over here, they're playing favorites. And the big thing about Dungeons and Dragons is that it's a collaborative story effort. So everybody at the table, I said this in my 5 tips for new DMs, everybody at the table deserves their spotlight. And a good dungeon master will make sure that the spotlight is given to everyone at least at some point in time. But if they are overly focused on another player, that can lead to very bad gaming experiences, especially if it's a player that is leaning into the favoritism and has very bad main character syndrome. The very best way to kind of spot this favoritism overall is to see how the dungeon master reacts with someone who they would normally be attracted to. For example, again, it's a very common thing with masculine or male dungeon masters to provide favoritism toward the only woman in the group because they want to get in there and, you know, bow chicka wow wow, right? They want to get in there, they want to try to get in this person's pants or take them on dates or whatever. So they'll start tossing them all the magic items you could possibly think of. They'll start writing story plot lines that are better for them. They'll start fudging rolls only for that person so nothing bad ever seems to happen to that person. And like I said, this is something you can spot fairly early on if you insert certain tests into your character builds. Certain things like asking to go into a race that's maybe not allowed and see if the DM allows any other player at the table to do it. Ask things that you expect the DM to deny and you want the DM to deny to make sure that they're not giving it to literally anybody else. Next up is if your dungeon master shoots down character ideas with absolutely zero feedback. So let's say you go into a game and you build your character and you hand it to the DM and the DM looks at it and they just go, no, and they toss the paper back at you. If that is something your dungeon master has a nasty habit of doing, it's probably best you don't play. And the reason for this, the reason this is such a big red flag, is because that means that the dungeon master probably has a very specific thing in mind, and they are going to more than likely railroad you. Now, I want to make it clear, because I know somebody's going to probably misinterpret what I'm saying. I'm not saying if a dungeon master denies your characters that it's a bad thing. Again, it's nuance. If they are denying it with literally zero feedback, if they take your character and they just go, nah, and they throw it back at you, that is a bad sign that they're probably going to railroad you. But if they take their character and they say, okay, well, this part of the backstory doesn't really fit with the setting, and this race of character is not in this setting, so if you could change those two things, and I'm more than willing to help you. Look for a dungeon master that's willing to help you with your backstory. If something doesn't quite fit the setting or the story, good dungeon masters will try to guide you with options. So for example, if you wanted to run a character that was the son of a king, but in the dungeon master's world, none of the kings have sons, then the dungeon master might guide you and say, okay, well, let's try the son of a baron, or the son of a lord, or something like that, right? They'll offer you ways for you to still be a son of royalty without completely shutting you down. And that is the difference between a dungeon master who's looking to incorporate your story into theirs, and a dungeon master who is looking to put you on a path that they specifically want you to be on, and you are not allowed to stray from that path. And for our final DM red flag today, we're going to be talking about no session zero. I have hammered this in multiple videos at this point, and I will continue to do so until everybody has a session zero. Until the day I no longer hear stories about people not having session zeros. Session zeros are very important. I laid out an entire video that I'll leave linked in the description down below on how to do the perfect session zero. You want to make sure that the session zero that you are playing in has everything involved. It has expectations, it has boundaries, it has some form of consent discussion, it has all of these things laid out for you, because if a dungeon master is not willing to do a session zero and discuss the game before it starts, then that is a dungeon master who does not care about their players' input. And a dungeon master who does not care about their players' input is a dungeon master who is not going to be successful in providing a good experience for their players. The best thing that you can do as a dungeon master is open your fucking ears and pay attention to what your players want. It's okay to be firm. It's okay to say no. But if you are directly not creating a good experience, if you're directly not taking feedback at all, then you're never going to improve as a dungeon master. And as a player, no session 0 is a very good sign that you are not going to have a good campaign. So make sure there's a session 0, make sure boundaries are clearly laid out, and pay attention to what happens inside of that session 0. That's another big thing. A lot of people don't think about that as well. It's not just having the session 0. See how the DM reacts and see how all the other players react. If you bring up something like, hey, I'm not comfortable with sexual assault, so I would rather not have themes of sexual assault in the story, and the DM goes, okay, don't play in that game. If you say, hey, I'm not comfortable with the idea of slavery, let us not have slavery themes in the game, and one of the other player goes, oh my god, don't play in that game. Literally make sure that everybody is listened to inside of the session 0, and make sure there's a session 0 to begin with. And that's all I have for you guys today as far as 5 DM red flag tips. If you are watching this on YouTube, then leave a comment down below. Let me know if any of these helped you, and let me know what some of your DM red flags are. I'd love to hear them. I appreciate you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one.